All right, welcome everyone to Unions 101. This is the first in a series of webinars that Cooperation Works will be offering over the next month or so, just covering the basics of unions, how unions and co-ops interact, what unionized co-ops are and what union co-ops are. There's been a lot of discussion recently about how unions and co-ops should interact, what their relationship is, and how we might redefine, support, whatever the case may be with that. So this is just an introduction to unions, but I'm going to hand it over to Margaret Bao to provide a little more information on this particular webinar. Thanks so much. Margaret, you can introduce if you, oh, she's still talking. Sorry.
Hello, everyone. We are fortunate to have Frank Santera share with us his experiences about the basics about cooperatives. Frank is an advanced certified business advisor for over 10 years at the Onondaga Community College Small Business Development Center in Syracuse, New York. As a Cooperation Works member, he is an advocate for worker cooperatives and ownership businesses. He has become a bridge with the small business administration community and the cooperative community. He has become an advocate for the Main Street Employee Ownership Act of 2018 and helping the small business development centers understand the potential of cooperatives for ownership conversions. So he also has a deep union experience. And so we asked him to share a little bit about just the basics about what are unions with those of us that are in the co-op community. So without further ado, Frank.
Thanks, Margaret. I love the introduction about being a bridge. I'm really happy to be able to be in that position, not just between the small business administration and the co-op community, but also now as a part of the union and co-op intersection. I feel really fortunate in that case. And I want to share a little bit about my story today, which will intersect a little bit with the story of, what unions are, what they do. And I'm really hoping that everyone on the call will be asking questions as well, because we're starting at the Union 101 level. So that's a broad case of information. And so I just kind of picked and chose for the slide deck that I'll be presenting and the topics that I'll be presenting today. But if you've got something outside of that or want a little bit more extended explanation of anything, then please feel free to jump in. I think we'll be taking questions and comments directly in the chat function, and then our moderators, Alex and Margaret, will be observing that and handling the questions to me in a timely and organized way. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we are, Unions 101, great graphic. Thanks, Alex. Happy to be a member of Cooperation Works now for a couple years and participating along with such a great group of developers and being that bridge with the SBDC. That's a great thing to be, and I'm really happy to continue that work. A little bit more about me and my union background and my union connection. So I grew up in a union household. My father was a trainman on the Monongahela Railway, which eventually, over many years, is now owned by the Norfolk Southern Railway Corporation. And he worked as a brakeman and a conductor for over 40 years. He returned from the Vietnam War, was lucky to get picked as a laborer, and then 1 or 2 years later, based upon his work, became a trainman. And all during that time, he was a lifetime member of the United Transportation Union, the UTU. And I knew that he was a member of the UTU, and I saw some of the work that he did while I was growing up. He even served a term as president of the local during a contract negotiation, and there was a short strike that took place, and I was quite young at the time, so I don't remember a lot of the details, but I recognize how how the sense of his union work and his solidarity with everyone he worked with was important, and I internalized that a bit at that stage. Since I've been working with the Onondaga Small Business Development Center, I've been a member of our union here. So our union here is called the OCCFTA, the Onondaga County, or excuse me, the Onondaga Community College Federation of Teachers and Administrators. We are a local chapter, number 1845 of NYSUT, which is the New York State United Teachers Union. And we are under the umbrella of AFT, American Federation of Teachers, and AFL-CIO. As a part of my membership here, I was elected to the executive committee as a professional administrator at large, steward delegate in 2014. So alongside being a member, I've been a part of the executive committee, decision-making, governance, and other leadership for our local union. And as a part of that, attended the NYSUT Leadership Institute in 2017, which was about a 7-day course on leadership in general union history as well. And I've also served as the chair of our Vote Cope Political Action Committee since 2017. And just a quick note on that, because one of the negative comments that you might hear sometimes from people who are anti-union or anti-dues paying is because they believe that their dues shouldn't have to go towards any political activities for one side or the other, so to speak, as we're in a very, we have a very much a two-party system right now. And so when folks come to us, we make it very clear that we have a separate political action committee for electoral and political activities. And so the dues that you would pay for membership in the OCCFTA or for other locals who are set up similar to this are not used for any political activities. You can choose to pay separately for Vote Cope activities, which is the political arm of the work that we do as a union. But in either case, right, you have a voice in the matter and what kind of activities might be undertaken, either for the membership activities, the governance and leadership activities, or the political activities in whichever arm that you're involved in. And there's our really old logo that really needs updated in the blue circle there. And hopefully that's going to get updated this year. We've got plans for that. The historical connection. I know that the rest of this webinar series on unions and co-ops is going to go into much more detail on things such as the history and how unions and co-ops can work together. But I think that just as an introductory webinar, that folks just should be sort of on the same page and understanding that there has been a long historical connection between unions and co-ops. And one of the often cited sources of that is the goals of the Knights of Labor, who were formed in, I believe, 1869, if I remember correctly, by garment workers. And these goals included two items that are just, right off of the co-op playbook, right? Workers, cooperatives, and worker-owned factories. And so all of the other things on here, obviously, too, are other things that, mostly co-ops would be in favor of and would be supporting. But the Knights of Labor were very specific about the need to move beyond the simple wage labor system, right? Supersede the wage labor system and move also into ownership of the capital, right? And the active workplace. I'll say that another historical connection for me between co-ops and unions is that the first co-op I ever remember recognizing is that of the credit union from my father's workplace. So there's another connection, right, dating back to how different types of cooperatives interact with unions in different ways. There's no simple line, there's no linear line that we can put together. As we know, when we work with co-ops as developers, lots of different models, lots of emerging models, and information can come to play. The relationships between people and their unions and their cooperatives are also many faceted. I was really happy to be a union in a union household and have that credit union membership growing up. And that was something that also sort of fanned the flames in me, and that historical relationship. And then just briefly again here, the union co-op model, right? People will say, well, why do you need the union and the co-op together? Well, in a sense, they're twice as strong and twice as nice to have both in your workplace. I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to have both if that was an option for you. This great model graphic is really clear in my estimation. It shows you exactly how the format for the model is laid out. Starting on the left of your screen in the blue shirts, which are the worker owners of the cooperative. And then they essentially populate two subgroups. One is the board of directors, which manages the cooperative ownership of the organization. And the other subgroup is the union committee, right? We move one step further to the right. The board of directors appoints the management, which runs the business and interacts with the union then, if there is one present, on negotiating contracts and resolving issues. The union itself can work as sort of a watchdog, right? An extra watchdog on the management and the board. When you see sometimes the traditional circle of how a general worker co-op is in operation between the worker owners and the board of directors and the management, now we're adding another layer in there to make sure that we're not just relying on good faith in contracts, but we also have a party, a union party, a legal representative of the workers to be able to make sure that the working conditions are satisfactory and that they can even access other resources that the union organizations will be able to bring to bear. And you see some other examples there at the bottom right, such as potentially more cost-effective health and retirement plans and a platform for solidarity. So how do unions do? I think that most people would not be surprised to understand that unions are an organization that is built upon democracy and democratic practice, and having the common interest of members in mind. So this is going to be like, I'm almost describing a co-op, right? Because it's very similar in a lot of ways. Membership is active, not passive, right? We expect people to participate because we want them to have a say and we want them to have a voice and not to be feeling left out. Through participation, and then leadership also plays special roles in creating opportunities for participation by setting up, organizing committees, special events, etc. Those activities are governed and initiated democratically by the members' interests and needs. We just finished having a survey, a campus-wide survey here at our community college, in which we asked questions about the campus climate, culture, okay? Not the weather, but the atmosphere of the workplace, right? Because we recognize that everybody's not always eager to speak up or is willing to speak up because there's fear, right? There's fears of retribution in workplaces. And this is one of the places where we can really ensure through grievance processes and legislation and labor law and legal channels that a member will not be improperly fired or let go or acted against if they're speaking up and if they're voicing their interests and their needs. Yeah. There's something called protected concerted activity, which union members are given the explicit right to be able to talk about their workplace issues and to be able to talk about the needs that they have, et cetera. And then people interact in very similar ways other organizations would, through meetings, surveys, one-on-ones, service on an executive committee, keeping touch through newsletters, word of mouth, email lists, and reports. Now, this has potentially many levels to it, right? Because you saw earlier how we have a local, and then we have a state union, and then we have an umbrella union nationally as well. And so participation in all of these is, of course, difficult for any one person. So, you know, one of the parts that leadership plays in your local is coordinating sort of these different participatory levels and engagements between the members as opportunities. I was happy to go to the AFT national conference a few years ago when it was held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because it's where I grew up near there, and I was able to visit my family. But it was really amazing to see a large organization, a large union level organization, and how they went through their conference proceedings and their decision making at that high level and so forth, and to recognize, right, that you're part of a large movement that has member and worker rights at the forefront. A little bit more detail on how our structure is set up at our union local here at OCC. We've got a pretty standard structure, but a few details to point out about how this looks. Overall, if you count them here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 members of our executive committee. I think I left one out because it should be an odd number. Maybe it's 13. But you've got the elected president, and then you've got the elected vice president of 3 different bargaining units. Okay. So I'm hoping that folks will participate, and somebody will take a turn here in reading a definition for me. I just put it in the chat. Can we have a volunteer? Maybe by raising your hand or saying me in the chat to read the definition of bargaining unit.
I can read it for you, Frank. Oh no, Mike said it. Great. You go for it, Mike.
Well, I raised my hand.
Okay, I will do that. Hi guys. Bargaining unit, unemployed group that on the basis of related skills or common interest in working condition is an appropriate unit for collective bargaining. The bargaining unit is a specified group of employees in a union empowered to bargain collectively with their employer.
Thank you, Mike. So we have 3 bargaining units. We have the faculty, the adjuncts, and the professional administrators. Professional administrators might sound a little bit like a misnomer because we do call the bosses on campus administrators, but they have another specific term in regards to how we refer to them when it comes to union contract and bosses versus workers, and that is as management confidential. But the professional administrators bargaining unit that I'm a part of is one that entails all of the support staff on campus. It includes the direct one-on-one services that come from different departments, includes things such as recruiting and counseling and other lifelong learning departments that we may have as well. So pretty much all the programming on campus that's not directly classroom teaching and professorships. And of course, there's also 2 positions, the treasurer and secretary, that are elected for the executive committee, and they handle just the basic business that you would expect. And then below that, there's 2 at-large stewards for each of those bargaining units. And so I am one of the at-large stewards for our professional administrators bargaining unit. What does that mean? That means that I'm somebody who is in the campus community that is representing the union, and that is able to help regular members with understanding the contract, with finding the right pathways for answers that they need, for listening potentially to that folks who reach out about grievances or issues that they're having with their supervisors or with their administrative management confidential folk. We sort of act as an intermediary between the union and the members and the leadership of the union. So in addition to that, since we sit on the executive committee, we participate in the regular decision-making that gets undertaken at that level as well. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we did the campus climate survey recently. That was something that we as the executive committee discussed and decided to do and undertook. And now we'll be moving on to the next phase of how do we take that information we garnered and how do we create special resources or opportunities for our members to gain something from that, right? And in this regard, we want them to gain an understanding, a better understanding of their rights. Okay. I see John gave a wink in the chat there about active membership, which, yeah, just like with any organization, right? You have some folks who are active and many people who are not active. We're undertaking a brand new campaign on our campus this year to try to move that needle a little bit. We'll be doing more outreach on campus with some t-shirt giveaways and some coffee mug giveaways. We'll be doing a solidarity walk across campus, which hasn't been something that has been done recently here. But the idea is to allow the management confidential and the bosses on campus to just, recognize that we're still here, we're still doing our work, but also for the members, right, to understand that we're here and that we're working for them. Because one of the things that members often struggle with is, what exactly do our union dues pay for, right? What exactly are you doing for us? And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next one. So who joins unions? This is just kind of a general sense of what people in an organization or in a workplace might be looking for in regards to, union support and union participation. So they want to make sure that there's some sort of democracy being practiced within the workplace and some ability to engage in collective action. I don't know about you, but if you've ever been the person who is trying to make a change by themselves, it's a struggle. And you want the ability to have a collective activity around changes and efforts and campaigns. You want a fair work contract and fair working conditions, right? You want some sort of a platform to be able to engage in those discussions with the bosses or with the managers of an organization as well. I'm going to put another definition here in the chat. Our next volunteer, who would like to read that one for us on collective bargaining?
Well, heck, I'll volunteer if nobody else does.
Thank you.
All right, collective bargaining, a method of determining hours, wages, and working conditions by direct negotiations between representatives of the employer and union representatives of the employees. The results of a bargaining are set forth in a collective bargaining agreement or CBA, sometimes referred to as a contract, which determines terms and conditions of employment for all workers in a bargaining unit.
Super. So I mentioned earlier that we have 3 different bargaining units at our local. However, we negotiate and collectively bargain all together because we want the contracts for those 3 units to be as close to each other and as consistent with each other as possible. Now, it's hard to do, right? Because there's different expectations, rights, and responsibilities, especially for different types of workers in a workplace. Obvious difference here, right? Faculty usually have summers off. Professional administrators don't. But how could we bring those contracts closer together? Well, some campuses, for instance, are doing summer hours for professional administrators. Maybe you've got an earlier start time and an earlier end time during the day, so you can get out and enjoy the sunshine. Maybe you've got a slightly longer work day, Monday through Thursday, so you can have every other Friday off. Maybe you just got an extra week off during the summer, maybe around the midpoint of the summer, right? There's lots of things that can be worked in, but the idea is that when you're collectively bargaining and you're doing so, you're representing the sort of best intentions for all of your workers on campus. And so it makes sense to try to keep those close together as you move forward through negotiations and sort of that rising ship, right? Who else would enjoy being in a union? Well, workers who enjoy camaraderie of their colleagues and do so without fear of retribution. It's hard to imagine, but it does happen in that if you speak about working conditions on campus, or if you speak about things that are not necessarily favored to be publicly known by a boss, then there's a lot of fear as to what might happen to you. Now, you're protected, of course, by that contract and by that due process and that just cause that's included in that contract. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other types of retribution, sort of, you know, the social level, the lack of promotion, you know, if selected, and so forth, that you might set a target on yourself for. But if you're doing this together with others, then it becomes less of an issue, right? Workers who need help dealing with superiors, right? One of the main things that people look for is that representation and support if they're going into a situation where they're going to have a meeting with a superior that might be disciplinary in action, for instance, right? And you do have the rights to, you know, in most situations, to have a union representative with you there in that situation. I know that we do have that right as a public institution and as a public employees under the Weingarten rulings, that we can have a union representative with us in those meetings. And it's really nice to have that support, and also knowledge that somebody who is attending that meeting with you is actively engaged with those superiors on a regular basis, maybe has a better relationship with them, maybe understands more of the legal ramifications of what you're talking about, and probably has a really good hold on the contract in the role that they're playing as well. And then workers who want consistency and sustainability in the workplace. Most people value job consistency and a sustainable paycheck over time, not needing to worry about if they're going to lose hours unfairly, or if they're just going to be let go without just cause. And so that is something that the contract, stipifies, and people really get a lot of information from in regards to how to deal with that consistency. And I see a comment from John there about the NLRA protecting workers. John, you want to jump on and just mention that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's just that the National Labor Relations Act, which the Wagner Act passed in the 30s, it protects certain rights to workers, whether or not you're represented, but trying to actually enforce those rights, the power dynamics are really against you as an individual. That's all, really. So you do have the right to gripe about work. It's just whether you'll get fired for it or not probably depends if you have other people supporting you.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, if you're the squeaky wheel, you might get the grease, but you might also just get the junkyard. And so having the collective bargaining agreement and the union representation can give you the confidence to be able to speak up and to work towards those better conditions and fight against, the situations that the bosses might be incorrectly acting on in defiance of the contract and the contractual language. And that's when that's what we would call a grievance. And here's a definition. Yeah, Elizabeth's hand was up. So if she wants to take on reading our next definition.
Oh, okay. Grievances, a formal complaint usually lodged by an employee or the union alleging a misinterpretation or improper application of one or more terms in the collective bargaining contract, i.e. method of dealing with grievances is through a grievance procedure negotiated in the union contract.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is not just going in the grease or the junkyard, a treatise on unions. So this is not just going in to talk to your boss and saying that you're unhappy, right? This is actually looking at the contract and interpreting the actions of the bosses on that contract and how they may have not held to their responsibilities within that contract. And so that's where the collective bargaining contract comes into play, and where your union representatives come into that as solidarity, and eventually working through any legal action that might need to be taken. So this is probably one of the most valuable parts of this slideshow, if I do say so. Why do we pay union dues, or why do we have to pay dues? I mean, it's one of those things that folks who are on the fence of joining the union, the local, or have decided not to pay in, always ask, right? They're like, well, what do we have to pay dues for? What are you doing for us? And one of the most obvious things, and the thing that takes the most money out of our local as a budget, is our dues pass through to our umbrella union, right, or to our higher level unions, and for the work that they do. So there's always a passage up of a large number of funds to budget those activities, which in return support us as local unions as well. So that's probably the largest amount of dollars that come out of our local budget. And I looked at my pay stubs leading up to today just to see exactly how much it is that I was paying in union dues throughout the year, and it's about $650. And so, it's not an insignificant amount, but it's also not an amount that is likely to place undue burden on people as well. But there's always that question of individuals' needs, and does that balance out their interest in paying for their dues versus not paying for their dues and still getting some protection from the union, right? I mean, the union will still represent them. And there are different kinds of shops, union shops, closed shops, open shops, and different types of laws across the country in different states, right to work laws and so forth, that don't require you to pay dues into your local. And if that's the case, it's a individual's decision whether or not to do so. What else do our dues pay for? Negotiating contracts. So this is a significant amount. Every 5 years currently, our local negotiates. We're hoping to shorten that, I believe, maybe to every 4 years. And our next contract runs out in our current contract runs out in August 2024. So we'll probably be entering some sort of negotiation phase, at least research-oriented phase, to talk about what we want to look for in that next contract. One of the things that we did last contract was we included integrative bargaining as the type of bargaining model that we wanted to engage with our bosses. We put that definition in and see who can read that for us. Any hands up?
I'll do it.
Super.
Integrative bargaining. Each party tries to benefit through integrative bargaining, which is why it's so often referred to as a form of win-win bargaining. Each side tries to consider the other's position and bring issues to the table that aim to benefit both parties, such as employees and employers both stand to lose and gain in integrative bargaining.
So losing and gaining, both sides. That's kind of the balance, you know, a dance, a delicate balance that people might be looking to obtain as a part of their bargaining, because everybody can't get everything all at the same time, right? The matter in our case is that even when you go to the table with integrative bargaining in mind, that still doesn't necessarily mean that each side is acting according to good faith in regards to integrative bargaining. I'm by far not an expert on negotiations, although I did pick up an old textbook on negotiations from a little free library recently, and I'm making my way through it as I do my 30 minutes of stationary exercise bike at home. And I'm learning a whole lot about the different types of bargaining and negotiations and what goes into the thinking behind them. So it's something that is important to understand what your strategy is going into your negotiations. Legal support to enforce contracts also costs money, right? When you're going through the grievance process and you're trying to come to an understanding with the bosses, it can start off, you know, informally in regards to direct discussions, but at some point it may need to go into the legal halls of justice, and it costs money for us to be able to pay legal staff for that. There's release time payments for executive committee members. In our case, our president and our vice presidents all get release time payments, which essentially allows them to receive payment for some of their time and to do that outside of their regular campus responsibilities. And so they can pull time out of their regular work and replace that with union work and still get paid for it, because we provide those release time payments. It's not a lot. That's why there's only $1 sign there. You know, it's a minimum, but it's something, and it really enables union executive committee members to be able to commit time to the work that needs to be done. There's some fun stuff, right? Like professional and collegial development. We've got a year-end party celebrating the retirees every year. There's a holiday social event every year. There's conferences that you can go to and certifications and trainings that you can undertake. All those things, of course, cost money. Again, not a whole lot in the total budget, but they're important things to keep the union acting in the terms of, you know, solidarity with each other. advocacy money. So, right, buttons, t-shirts, traditional media, social media, however you're getting your message out. And that's related to technical infrastructure such as the website, printing, insurance, and bank fees, everything that costs to keep an organization flowing. Direct assistance. Will oftentimes give donations to injured or sick members or to the campus food bank as examples. Oops, there we go. So the idea that there's lots of things to spend money on shouldn't surprise anyone, but a lot of that work, if you're not active in the union, sort of takes place behind, behind doors that you're not aware of. So I think one of the things that we really need to work harder at is communications and transparency between the leadership in the union and the membership as well. And I think that in any organization that you're in, I think we would all agree that those are good goals. Just a couple other mentions here. So we've talked about some of the ways that we're able to act in accordance to the needs of the members and to do so in a way that is legally granted and permitted. And you can look some of these things up on your own at a later time if you want to get more information about them. I mentioned the Weingarten ruling, the second bullet there, as a public employee at a unionized workplace, the right to union representation. I mentioned briefly the right to work laws that are currently in 28 states. If I had the most up-to-date information, which prohibits a union shop clause that requires employees to join the union. And then most recently, the Supreme Court decision, Janus, states and public sector unions may no longer extract agency fees from non-consenting employees. And so that was a big issue with us a couple years back because we had to make sure that people were opting in to pay their union dues, and we did lose some membership during that.
Frank, we have a request to see the last slide again.
Okay.
And 60 and briefly.
Let me go backwards. Right there.
This what you wanted to see, Shelley?
Yes, thank you.
I'll just leave that up for another minute. I know that as I was coming into the office today, I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about the numbers of people in favor of unions, according to a most recent Gallup poll that they had online. And this was Freakonomics Radio, if you're interested in hearing that. And even though, according to what was reported on that blog, we're down to about 10% of folks in union membership right now, compared to the highs back in the early mid-century. The number of people who actually are favorable towards unions is actually very high, 70+% for Democrats who were polled, and 40% plus for Republicans that were polled. So that's a good sign, and all the activity that we're seeing in regards to union organizing and votes that are taking place is a great sign as well. Puts a smile on the face, but also means that there's a lot of work still waiting to be done. This is my contact information. I'd love to hear from you if you have any other specific interest in,
Did we lose him or did I lose you all?
He froze
I'm
for
still
me
here.
as well. So, and we're just about to get to Q&A. So hopefully he'll be back in a moment. Maybe I'll drop something in the chat.
Mike, are you there?
Hopefully he'll be able to hop back on. I see him. All right, I'm readmitting him.
Okay.
Frank, are you back with us?
We missed you.
Hi, Frank, can you hear us?
So sorry about that. Our whole building, power just flicked off in the whole building. So
Wow.
computers went down.
All right. Well, it seemed like we were about to get into Q&A. Is that your take on things as well, Frank?
Yeah, I'd love to hear any questions folks might have.
So there were a couple that came up. There's been actually a lot of great just chat, conversation happening in the chat, and some really great resources that have been shared. So I encourage folks to scroll through and see sort of just what everyone is collectively bringing into this meeting. And I will try to pull the resources from the chat and share them out with folks afterward as well. But earlier, Frank, we had a question come from Mike. And I believe it was a slide from quite a bit earlier, which I'm not sure you will be able to go back to on your phone, but said co-op members form a union committee and only those in the union committee paying dues are getting repped by the union. And later folks were saying that, you know, other folks, all workers benefit. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, Frank.
Yeah, and so in our case, that's how it works as well. And you are not necessarily, or you're not prevented from having union representation because you don't pay your dues, right? And you know, you can call those folks freeloaders or whatever it might be the case. That's why we have to work to educate and get people involved in the union, right? Because it's not automatic, it's not required, and there has to be a reason for them to do so. And one of the things that I always talk about, right, is that last slide that I went down. You know, what do we spend our money on, and what do we do as a union? Because you know, we want you to join us because you want to actively be a part of us. You know, yeah.
Actually, my question is about like, so there is a co-op, and it seems like from your graphic, it seems like only part of the co-op forming a union committee. And my question was like, how big is that union committee? And so is it more like is it like more than 50% of co-op members are getting into that union committee, or like how what's the proportion for that?
Oh, I think it depends a lot on the size of the co-op and the number of workers that there are and worker owners that there are. Certainly 50% seems like it would be a lot if it was a larger scale. You know, it could be, you know, in our case here at the college, you know, we have a 13-member executive committee board, but we have, you know, 400 plus members representing. So I think it depends a lot on the scale of the co-op.
Got it. Thank you.
We had a question come in from John that said, or that asks, which group makes what decisions in the union? President, stewards, members. Is this similar to co-ops, GM board members? How is the voice of the different bargaining units in your union balanced?
Yeah, very good. It is similar in a lot of ways. Our voices are, we try to balance our voices by having as much participation from the membership in each of those units as we can. As you might imagine, it's a challenge when it comes to the adjunct unit because adjuncts are in and out and spend less time on campus and are less, you know, committed to the campus and to the community as a whole. So it's a challenge, and we need to make sure that our leadership is of the mindset, right, of the common good. The executive committee functions in the same way that a board or a workers committee would, in that we do make, you know, many of the decisions that take place, and we are of course elected to those positions by the full membership of the union as well. The contractual negotiations that take place also have to be ratified by the full membership as a final step. The process, though, that which you went through the negotiation process can vary a lot. And honestly, I'll say that I wasn't very happy with our last negotiations because a small negotiating committee sort of was in control of all of the steps of the negotiation and didn't sort of bring that back to the full membership until the very end when contract voting was needed to take place to ratify it. So I'm hoping we can make that change this next time around and have more iteration back and forth between the negotiation committee and the full membership.
We just had a question come in from Kim asking, what worker co-op size do you advise needs a union?
Boy, I don't know the answer to that.
I do.
That might
I know the answer. All worker cooperatives need to acknowledge that they are part of the labor movement and participate in the labor movement by becoming union members. And by the way, going up through the leadership of unions to represent worker cooperatives in the labor movement. Get into a union.
that sounds like a great answer to me. Yeah, absolutely. Probably by the time, if you wait around until you wonder if you need to have a union or if you need union membership, it'll probably be too late because things will have already started to go south, or you won't have that connections that you need. So yeah, go for it, right?
Well, and acknowledge ideologically that you are part of the labor movement, start to understand how the labor movement works, participate in the lobbying that your union does, combine your power with the power of the labor movement to get, more power for workers, participate. Be part of the greater whole.
Yeah, I think there's a group and a concept in union organizing that's called bargaining for the common good, right? And that's where you're not just bargaining for yourself as workers, you're bargaining for your community, you're bargaining for the people in your community, right? And so that's a sort of the mind frame that you want to be going into this as well as co-ops. You're bargaining for workers everywhere. You're involved for workers everywhere, not just in your co-op.
Growing worker power. That's what we do. That's what unions do. That's what worker cooperatives do. Just understand you're both part of the same thing.
I love it. Yeah.
I have a related question with startups. You got a small business that's not even fully profitable yet, but has interest in unionizing because they were formerly with union employers. In a startup process, when do you think would be a good time for them to, unionize, I guess, or how would that look if you had any recommendations?
Well, I mean, I think it would be similar to the last question and answer that we had, right? And that they should probably start looking at it early on now. And then the other thing that I mentioned, right, was the scale of it. And so one of the things that you're going to get probably better answers on this type of question is from one of the future webinars in this series, where we actually go into some case studies and some true life examples of that union co-op relationship that are active or actively moving forward right now. I wish I could answer that for you, but I welcome you to come back to future sessions.
Sounds good. Thanks.
And I have a question in the chat, and then I'll get to the folks who are raising their hands, unless Elizabeth, you were responding to that last question and wanted to jump in.
No, just go ahead.
So we had a question come in from Margaret asking, in your opinion, what are the major differences between worker cooperatives and unions?
The major difference? Well, I would say that in the case of that graphic that I showed early on as to how the structure of people within a unionized co-op can be, is that the union is very specifically looking at the maintaining the workers' rights. And one of the things that we've got to consider is that a co-op represents not just the workers who are part of it, but also other interests sometimes, right? There could be investor classes of shares. There could be multi-stakeholders in which the board of directors is made up of representatives from different classes of shareholders and owners. And so we want to ensure, that the union is there to be focused on those workers' rights as the baseline for everything. And then whenever we talk about union representation and those different levels of membership as we go up to, national membership and national organizations that are working for our organization, they're engaging in and working towards legislative changes and laws that can assist. Co-ops are growing in size and are growing in scale and ability to have those long-reaching relationships as well, right? Through regional organizations and national apex organizations and so forth. There's not as many co-op members yet, but hopefully there will be someday, and they can sort of balance, stand side by side with the union power that's out there as well.
I just wanted to add to that, unions are a form of cooperative. So, what is the definition of a cooperative? Cooperative is a group of people that pool their resources to create benefits for their members. That's exactly what a union is. Okay, so really cooperatives are part of the unions are part of the cooperative movement. And worker cooperatives specifically, not most other cooperatives, but worker cooperatives specifically are the realization of the goals, all the objectives of the labor movement, because they return the means of production to the worker. They return the control of their economic life to the worker. So these are, things which seem to have lost sight of the fact that they are really this part of the same movement. Okay, that unions really are a type of cooperative.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yes,
Was that,
they operate in a cooperative way, right?
Yeah.
And they're meant to operate in a cooperative way and with democratic principles. Yeah.
Exactly. One worker, one vote.
was that the comment or question you had for your hand up, Elizabeth?
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you. I saw Quinn and then Mike on Stack. So Quinn, if you want to unmute.
You're muted.
Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for this event today, this morning. My question is kind of like zooming out on like a larger like movement scale maybe. I know like the labor movement has this, and unions have this like long history of partnering with many other movements and being part of this fabric of movements. And co-ops have this too, but I think maybe the labor union has it in maybe a bigger way. The union realm. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. What I'm getting at is what opportunities for partnerships and for like weaving this new movement of movements do you see that maybe cooperatives and unions combined can get to more effectively? Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I know a number of people on this call are doing great work in that regard as part of union co-op coalitions, working together to develop these ideas and these relationships as well. Back historically, right, as if we talk about how these partnerships came to be, oftentimes the unions were encouraging co-ops, not just for the workers, I believe, to own the means of production, but also to get the resources that they needed, right, through purchasing cooperatives and so forth, right. And so I think unions should be recognizing also that cooperatives are an important part of that the democratic governance and democratic workplaces that we want to see, and that we could have unions supporting local cooperatives as well. You'll always see buy union, right? If you're a union member, you're always encouraged to buy union. Well, what if there's not a union option? Well, how about then buy co-op, right? For union members to recognize that is an option for them too, that fits within the same sensibilities.
I was more getting at like, how can we support by working together? How can we support like maybe immigration movements, for example, student movements? How can we bring the idea of cooperation and the spirit behind unionization into churches, into homes, into schools? How can, because I see with cooperatives, they're so rooted in a community in a way that has maybe more diversity than the reach of labor. And so I'm wondering, like, how can we bring this ethic into like new spaces, or not into new spaces, but partner in new, stronger ways?
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge question, right? And I think that everybody's going to have probably a little bit different answer to that, depending on where you're at and where you're from and who you have in your community, right? How to take this on. Being actively involved with your local cooperative community, right? Being a member in your local food co-op, recognizing the worker co-ops that may exist, supporting conversions of those worker co-ops, and growing the community, right? Growing the network. And the same thing with unions. Is there a strike happening? Go out and walk with them, in solidarity. I think that all of us are just in this process of expanding the public consciousness of unions and co-ops in a lot of senses. Well, expanding the public consciousness of co-ops here in the United States, as far as unions go, I think it's trying to flip the negative connotations that are associated with unions so that they become more favorable once again in the United States. And yeah, you being the actor, right? When you come to an organization that you want to get involved, in these concepts, bring it to them. It's going to take each of us to do that. And hopefully you'll be able to find support from, our, larger scale organizing that's taking place from, groups like the United States Federation of Worker Co-ops, Cooperation Works developers, the cooperative development centers throughout the country, and on, right? There's also work related to how to bring the sensibilities of co-ops and the idea of co-ops in regards to economic development to your local municipalities, for instance, right? And so there's lots of channels and lots of pathways that you could potentially take with this. And so I would say, look at yourself and where your relationships are, and then, maybe identify the one that you want to try more for in regards to creating that sensibility and that consciousness, and then talk with folks who have resources to bring to it. But there's organizing being done at the local level, regional, state, national, and international level. So it kind of depends a lot on where you sit and where you are interested in going.
Thanks for that. It's a big question. We will go to Mike.
Hey, so I have trouble like conceptualizing how the collective bargaining can be done for worker co-op. So for like non-worker co-op, so say just like ordinary company, union rep will go to the non-co-op company and do the collective bargaining with the employer for the employee who is the member of union. But in case of worker co-op, so union rep will meet the worker owner and do the bargaining with worker owner who is already kind of have some consensus with the other worker owners. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of the questions that we're trying to bring some light to with this webinar series, is to understand how these relationships fit together and how they work in the long term, right? I mean, if you've got worker owners who are part of the management structure in an organization, I would argue that they, as much as any of us, have sort of some ingrained challenges, having been raised in a capitalist society in which we have to be reminded and held to truth when it comes to the needs of the workers in the organization, as opposed to the needs of the organization as a whole. And again, depending on the type of co-op, the intricacies of the bylaws and how it's organized and set up, I think that there's a really important place for somebody to be at the table, right, who is a part of the whole, but is also keeping the importance and interests of that singular component of the workers' rights and the workers' workplace needs at the forefront of negotiations, right, as well as everything else that might be related to it from the perspective of the consumer or the customer or the organization as a whole. Because an organization as a whole, if it's a worker co-op, has to make those economic and financial decisions as well. And we want to make sure, though, that the workers are getting paid a wage that's appropriate in the long term. And so it's a complicated question, and thankfully we're seeing more and more case studies and examples of this being brought to the forefront that we're learning from.
Thank you. And then I think our last question or comment for this webinar will be Elizabeth.
Okay, well, so on the notion of case studies, the Union Co-op Council of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, of which I am a co-founder, has a whole task force on creating those case studies, and we'll be producing them over the next few years. Because we've identified 30 or 40 union worker cooperatives, past and present, including a Los Angeles Cooperative Bakery. It was created in the 1930s by the bakers local number 37 here in Los Angeles. I mean, so some fairly older studies and how they came about out of a bagel bakery strike, that kind of thing, as well as current, worker cooperatives that are unionized. But the comment I really wanted to make was that one of the roles of worker cooperatives in the labor movement, because we have to see ourselves as we are part of the labor movement, and what is our role in the labor movement, is NLRB law was created, in the 30s. And in the 30s, the way the NLRB law is written, NLRA law, is written for a way that work was organized, back in the 30s, which is, everybody had full-time jobs, and unions helped them get, some security, so things like pensions and healthcare, got brought into those contexts of those full-time jobs. Since that time, corporate lawyers, by the way, corporations can pay full-time, all the time, every day, to try to undermine these safeguards for workers, have changed the landscape of work so that now we have temporary, part-time, seasonal, contract labor. All these things are ways that corporations try to get around the traditional model of work, right, which is the full-time representations. Unions are constrained in various ways by those definitions that were created way back in the 30s. Now, so unions have been eroded because of this constant pressure by corporate lawyers to get around NLRB law and the way that work is defined. Worker cooperatives give us an opportunity to organize the unorganizable right now. So things where work is being redefined by corporations so that it no longer fits under NLRB law. Worker cooperatives provide a way to organize those workers and then also join their unions so that we can still pursue that the ultimate pursuit of unions, which is to create greater worker power. Okay, greater worker power to create laws like child labor laws, to create laws like health and safety laws, to create laws like all the whole array of labor laws that we have that help protect our health and safety of our communities, our children, ourselves, all those things. So do not be shy. And you worker cooperatives seek to become leadership within unions, by the way. I don't know if anybody's ever thought about that, but once you get into a union, you can seek office and become a leader within your union. Thank you for my soapbox.
Super. Yeah. And I think it's a great, again, mention of the valuable information that's going to come from the rest of the series, rest of this webinar series, talking in a lot more detail about some of the specifics and the case studies and examples that we're learning from and sharing with each other.
I'd like to add, a pitch for the Union Co-op Council, because anybody here can join. Not only are we doing case studies, so if you're academically inclined and want to help write case studies, please join our case study task force. But we also have the other committee, our other task force, which is the Local Labor Outreach Task Force, where we are going to the local, the county feds all around the country, AFL-CIO county feds, which is where all the unions within one area meet. So in Los Angeles, where I'm from, we've done a presentation to our local county fed, which is 350 unions in LA County. Okay, it's the second largest county fed in the country. So AFL-CIO, County Federation of Labor, where all the labor unions in the area come together. We've done presentations on worker cooperatives, and we're offering workshops to labor leaders and labor staff and labor activists about worker cooperatives, so they know how to perceive worker cooperatives when worker cooperatives approach them as well. Because ignorance is on both sides, both the worker cooperative community and on the labor committee. Both have lost sight of their intimate sibling relationship.
But bust out of those silos.
Yes, bust out of those silos. Let's get busy on worker power.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that insight. Sounds, yeah, maybe we should have you on one of the webinars, Elizabeth. I appreciate you sharing your experience and your expertise, and hopefully folks will follow up and go check out the Union Co-op Council. I know there are some other folks on this call who are also involved with that. So that's, yeah, a great resource to check out. And obviously they're doing some really fantastic work. So we are just about out of time, and I just want to make sure folks know about some of the upcoming webinars, and I want to thank the various folks who made this call happen. So just so folks can put these on their calendar, some of the other webinars in this series include a union co-op model, Co-op Cincy at 10 years. We're going to offer that on Monday, April 11th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Then we have conversions to worker co-ops in a union setting, a toolkit, and that's with Rebecca Lurie. That's going to be Friday, April 22nd, also at 11 a.m. Pacific. And then we have a multi-stakeholder co-op with a worker membership class, and that's looking specifically at Gem City Food Co-op in Dayton, Ohio, and we'll have a Maha Selassie. And the date is TBD, but it should be, again, within the next month or so keep an eye out. And I will certainly send reminders. And if you signed up to get notifications, you'll see something landing in your inbox soon. And I really just want to thank Frank for giving such an informative, in-depth presentation. It's really great to have you as part of the Cooperation Works Network. And I'm just so thankful that you're bringing your experiences and expertise to this series. I also want to thank Margaret Bao, who has been the person who really quickly pulled this series together. She's an amazing connector and has been really great in getting our webinars together for the last few years, actually. And I also want to thank the Interpreters Cooperative of Madison for stepping up again fairly last minute to offer interpretation today. And we'll hopefully be bringing them back on for the rest of the series as well. So if you know anyone who would make use of the Spanish interpretation, make sure you recommend the series to them if you know they'd be interested. All right, I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you so much for joining today. Keep an eye out for more webinars from Cooperation Works. Thank you all.